Keep this bridge, then, as it is, and leave those who built it to watch over it. So, if we come up with the Scythians and succeed against them as we could wish, we may return by this route. Or, if we fail of finding them, our retreat will still be secure. For I've no fear lest the Scythians defeat us in battle, but my dread is lest we be unable to discover them and suffer loss while we wander about their territory. And now, mayhap it will be said, I advise thee thus in the hope of being myself allowed to remain behind, but in truth I have no other design than to recommend the course which seems to me the best, nor will I consent to be among those left behind. But my resolve is, in any case, to follow thee. The advice of Coes pleased Darius highly, who thus replied to him, Dear Lesbian, when I am safe home again in my place, be sure thou come to me, and with good deeds will I recompense thy good words of today. Having so said, the king took a leathern thong, and tying 60 knots in it, called together the Ionian tyrants, and spoke thus to them. Men of Ionia, my former commands to you concerning the bridge are now withdrawn. See, here is a thong. Take it, and observe my bidding with respect to it. From the time that I leave you to march forward into Scythia, untie every day one of the knots. If I do not return before the last day to which the knots will hold out, then leave your station and sail to your several homes. Meanwhile, understand that my resolve is changed, and that you are to guard the bridge with all care, and watch over its safety and preservation. By so doing, you will oblige me greatly. When Darius had thus spoken, he set out on his march with all speed. Before you come to Scythia, on the sea-coast, lies Thrace. The land here makes a sweep, and then Scythia begins, the Ister falling into the sea at this point with its mouth facing the east. Starting from the Ister, I shall now describe the measurements of the seashore of Scythia. Immediately that the Ister is crossed, Old Scythia begins, and continues as far as the city called Carchanitis, fronting towards the south wind and the midday. Here upon the same sea there lies a mountainous tract projecting into the Pontus, which is inhabited by the Tauri, as far as what is called the rugged Chersonese, which runs out into the sea upon the east. For the boundaries of Scythia extend on two sides to two different seas, one upon the south and the other towards the east, as is also the case with Attica. And the Tauri occupy a position in Scythia like that which a people would hold in Attica, who, being foreigners and not Athenians, should inhabit the high land of Sunium, from Thoricus to the township of Anaphlistus, if this tract projected into the sea somewhat further than it does. Such, to compare great things with small, is the Tauric territory. For the sake of those who may not have made the voyage around these parts of Attica, I'll illustrate in another way. It's as if in Iapygia a line were drawn from Port Brundisium to Tarentum, and a people different from the Iapygians inhabited the promontory. These two instances may suggest a number of others where the shape of the land closely resembles that of Taurica. Beyond this tract, we find the Scythians again in possession of the country above the Tauri and the parts bordering on the eastern sea, as also of the whole district lying west of the Cimmerian Bosphorus and the Palus Mæotis, as far as the river Tanais, which empties itself into that lake at its upper end. As for the inland boundaries of Scythia, if we start from the Ister, we find it enclosed by the following tribes. First the Agathyrsi, next the Neuri, then the Androphagi, and last of all the Melanchlaeni. Scythia, then, which is square in shape and has two of its sides reaching down to the sea, extends inland to the same distance that it stretches along the coast, and is equal every way. For it's a 10 days' journey from the Ister to the Borysthenes, and 10 more from the Borysthenes to the Palus Mæotis, while the distance from the coast inland to the country of the Melanchlaeni, who dwell above Scythia, is a journey of 20 days. I reckon the day's journey at 200 furlongs. Thus the two sides which run straight inland are 4,000 furlongs each, and the transverse sides at right angles to these are also of the same length, which gives the full size of Scythia. The Scythians, reflecting on their situation, perceived that they were not strong enough by themselves to contend with the army of Darius in open fight. They therefore sent envoys to the neighbouring nations, whose kings had already met, and were in consultation upon the advance of so vast a host. Now they who had come together were the kings of the Tauri, the Agathyrsi, the Neuri, the Androphagi, the Melanclini, the Geloni, the Budini, and the Sauromatai. The Tauri have the following customs. They offer in sacrifice to the Virgin all shipwrecked persons and all Greeks compelled to put into their ports by stress of weather. The mode of sacrifice is this. After the preparatory ceremonies, they strike the victim on the head with a club. Then, according to some accounts, they hurl the trunk from the precipice whereon the temple stands and nail the head to a cross. Others grant that the head is treated in this way, but deny that the body is thrown down the cliff. On the contrary, they say, it's buried. The goddess to whom these sacrifices are offered, the Tauri themselves declare to be Iphigenia, the daughter of Agamemnon. When they take prisoners in war, they treat them in the following way. The man who has taken a captive cuts off his head, and carrying it to his home, fixes it upon a tall pole, which he elevates above his house, most commonly over the chimney. The reason that the heads are set up so high is, it said, in order that the whole house may be under their protection. These people live entirely by war and plundering. The Agathyrsi are a race of men very luxurious and very fond of wearing gold on their persons. They have wives in common, that so they may be all brothers, and as members of one family may neither envy nor hate one another. In other respects, their customs approach nearly to those of the Thracians. The Neurian customs are like the Scythian. One generation before the attack of Darius, they were driven from their land by a huge multitude of serpents which invaded them. Of these, some were produced in their own country, while others, and those by far the greater number, came in from the deserts on the north. Suffering grievously beneath this scourge, they quitted their homes and took refuge with the Budini. It seems that these people are conjurers, for both the Scythians and the Greeks who dwell in Scythia say that every Neurian once a year becomes a wolf for a few days, at the end of which time he's restored to his proper shape. Not that I believe this, but they constantly affirm it to be true, and are even ready to back their assertion with an oath. The manners of the Androphagi are more savage than those of any other race. They neither observe justice, nor are governed by any laws. They are nomads, and their dress is Scythian, but the language which they speak is peculiar to themselves. Unlike any other nation in these parts, they are cannibals. The Melanclini wear, all of them, black cloaks, and from this derive the name which they bear. Their customs are civic. The Budini are a large and powerful nation. They have all deep blue eyes and bright red hair. There's a city in their territory called Gelonus, which is surrounded with a lofty wall 30 furlongs each way, built entirely of wood. All the houses in the place and all the temples are of the same material. Here are temples built in honor of the Grecian gods and adorned after the Greek fashion with images, altars, and shrines, all in wood. There's even a festival held every third year in honor of Dionysus, at which the natives fall into the Dionysiac fury. For the fact is that the Geloni were anciently Greeks, who, being driven out of the factories along the coast, fled to the Budini and took up their abode with them. They still speak a language half Greek, half Scythian. The Budini, however, do not speak the same language as the Geloni, nor is their mode of life the same. They are the aboriginal people of the country, and are nomads. Unlike any of the neighbouring races, they eat lice. The Geloni, on the contrary, are tillers of the soil, eat bread, have gardens, and both in shape and complexion are quite different from the Budini. The Greeks, notwithstanding, call these latter Geloni, but it's a mistake to give them the name. Their country is thickly planted with trees of all manner of kinds. In the very woodiest part is a broad, deep lake surrounded by marshy ground with reeds growing on it. Here otters are caught and beavers, with another sort of animal which has a square face. With the skins of this last, the natives border their capotes, and they also get from them a remedy which is of virtue in diseases of the womb. It's reported of the Sauromatai that when the Greeks fought with the Amazons, whom the Scythians call oiopata, or manslayers, as it may be rendered, oior being civic for man and pata for to slay, it's reported, I say, that the Greeks, after gaining the battle of Thermodon, put to sea, taking with them on board 3 of their vessels all the Amazons whom they had made prisoners, and that these women, upon the voyage, rose up against the crews and massacred them to a man. As, however, they were quite strange to ships, and didn't know how to use either rudder, sails, or oars, they were carried, after the death of the men, where the winds and the waves listed. At last they reached the shores of the Palus Maeotis, and came to a place called Kremni, or the Cliffs, which is in the country of the free Scythians. Here they went ashore, and proceeded by land towards the inhabited regions. The first herd of horses which they fell in with they seized, and mounting upon their backs, fell to plundering the Scythian territory. The Scyths couldn't tell what to make of the attack upon them. The dress, the language, the nation itself were alike unknown. Whence the enemy had come even was a marvel. Imagining, however, that they were all men of about the same age, they went out against them and fought a battle. Some of the bodies of the slain fell into their hands, whereby they discovered the truth. Hereupon they deliberated and made a resolve to kill no more of them, but to send against them a detachment of their youngest men, as near as they could guess equal to the women in number, with orders to encamp in their neighbourhood and do as they saw them do. When the Amazons advanced against them, they were to retire and avoid a fight. When they halted, the young men were to approach and pitch their camp near the camp of the enemy. All this they did on account of their strong desire to obtain children from so notable a race. So the youths departed and obeyed the orders which had been given them. The Amazons soon found out that they hadn't come to do them any harm, and so they, on their part, ceased to offer the Scythians any molestation. And now, day after day, the camps approached nearer to one another. Both parties led the same life, neither having anything but their arms and horses, so that they were forced to support themselves by hunting and pillage. But the Amazons, towards noonday, used to do the following. They would scatter in ones and twos, moving away from each other to relieve themselves. When the Scythians realized this, they did likewise. One of the young men approached one of the women who was alone, and the Amazon didn't reject him, but allowed him to enjoy her favours. She bade him, by signs, for they didn't understand each other's language, to bring a friend the next day to the spot where they had met, promising on her part to bring with her another woman. He did so, and the woman kept her word. When the rest of the youths heard what had taken place, they also sought and gained the favour of the other Amazons. The 2 camps were then joined in one, the Scythians living with the Amazons as their wives, and the men were unable to learn the tongue of the women, but the women soon caught up the tongue of the men. When they could thus understand one another, the Scyths addressed the Amazons in these words: "We have parents and properties. Let us therefore give up this mode of life and return to our nation and live with them. You shall be our wives there no less than here, and we promise you to have no others." But the Amazons said, "We couldn't live with your women. Our customs are quite different from theirs. To draw the bow, to hurl the javelin, to bestride the horse, these are our arts. Of womanly employments we know nothing. Your women, on the contrary, do none of these things, but stay at home in their wagons, engaged in womanish tasks, and never go out to hunt, or to do anything. We should never agree together." But if you truly wish to keep us as your wives, and would conduct yourselves with strict justice towards us, go you home to your parents, bid them give you your inheritance, and then come back to us, and let us and you live together by ourselves." The youths approved of the advice and followed it. They went and got the portion of goods which fell to them, returned with it, and rejoined their wives, who then addressed them in these words following: "We are ashamed and afraid to live in the country where we now are. Not only have we stolen you from your fathers, but we have done great damage to Scythia by our ravages. As you like us for wives, grant the request we make of you. Let us leave this country together, and go and dwell beyond the Tanais." Again the youths complied. Crossing the Tanais, they journeyed eastward a distance of 3 days' march from that stream, and again northward a distance of 3 days' march from the palace Myotis. Here they came to the country where they now live, and took up their abode in it. The women of the Sauromatae have continued from that day to the present to observe their ancient customs, frequently hunting on horseback with their husbands, sometimes even unaccompanied, in war taking the field and wearing the very same dress as the men. The Sauromatae speak the language of Scythia, but have never talked it correctly, because the Amazons learnt it imperfectly at the first. Their marriage law lays it down that no girl shall wed till she has killed a man in battle. Sometimes it happens that a woman dies unmarried at an advanced age, having never been able in her whole lifetime to fulfill the condition. The envoys of the Scythians, on being introduced into the presence of the kings of these nations, who were assembled to deliberate, made it known to them that the Persian, after subduing the whole of the other continent, had thrown a bridge over the Strait of the Bosphorus, and crossed into the continent of Europe, where he had reduced the Thracians, and was now making a bridge over the Ister, his aim being to bring under his sway all Europe also. "Stand ye not aloof, then, from this contest," they went on to say. "Look not on tamely while we are perishing, but make common cause with us, and together let us meet the enemy. If ye refuse, we must yield to the pressure, and either quit our country or make terms with the invaders. For what else is left for us to do if your aid be withheld from us? The blow, be sure, will not light on you more gently upon this account. The Persian comes against you no less than against us, and will not be content, after we are conquered, to leave you in peace. We can bring strong proof of what we here advance. Had the Persian leader indeed come to avenge the wrongs which he suffered at our hands when we enslaved his people, and to war on us only, he would have been bound to march straight upon Scythia without molesting any nation by the way. Then it would have been plain to all that Scythia alone was aimed at. But now, what has his conduct been? From the moment of his entrance into Europe, he has subjugated without exception every nation that lay in his path. All the tribes of the Thracians have been brought under his sway, and among them even our own neighbours, the Getae." The assembled princes of the nations, after hearing all that the Scythians had to say, deliberated. At the end, opinion was divided. The kings of the Geloni, Budini, and Sauromatae were of accord, and pledged themselves to give assistance to the Scythians. But the Agathyrsian and Neurian princes, together with the sovereigns of the Androphagi and Melanchlyni, and the Tauri, replied to their request as follows: "If you had not been the first to wrong the Persians and begin the war, we should have thought the request you make just. We should then have complied with your wishes and joined our arms with yours. Now, however, the case stands thus. You, independently of us, invaded the land of the Persians, and so long as God gave you the power, lorded it over them. Raised up now by the same God, they are come to do to you the like. We, on our part, did no wrong to these men in the former war, and will not be the first to commit wrong now. If they invade our land and begin aggressions upon us, we will not suffer them, but till we see this come to pass, we will remain at home. For we believe that the Persians are not come to attack us, but to punish those who are guilty of first injuring them." When this reply reached the Scythians, they resolved, as the neighbouring nations refused their alliance, that they would not openly venture on any pitched battle with the enemy, but would retire before them, driving off their herds, choking up all the wells and springs as they retreated, and leaving the whole country bare of forage. They divided themselves into 3 bands, one of which, namely that commanded by Scopacis, it was agreed should be joined by the Sauromatai, and if the Persians advanced in the direction of the Tanais, should retreat along the shores of the Palus Maiotis and make for that river, while if the Persians retired, they should at once pursue and harass them. This was one division of the royal forces, and this the route it was instructed to take. The 2 other divisions, the principal one under the command of Edonthyrsis, and the third, of which Taxarchus was king, were to unite in one, and joined by the detachments of the Gelonian Budini, were, like the others, to keep at the distance of a day's march from the Persians, falling back as they advanced, and doing the same as the others. And first they were to take the direction of the nations which had refused to join the alliance, and were to draw the war upon them, that so, if they would not of their own free will engage in the contest, they might by these means be forced into it. Afterwards it was agreed that they should retire into their own land, and should it on deliberation appear to them expedient, join battle with the enemy. When these measures had been determined on, the Scythians went out to meet the army of Darius, sending on in front as scouts the fleetest of their horsemen. Their wagons, wherein their women and their children lived, and all their cattle, except such a number as was wanted for food, which they kept with them, were made to precede them in their retreat, and departed with orders to keep marching, without change of course, to the north. The scouts of the Scythians found the Persian host advanced 3 days' march from the Ister, and immediately took the lead of them at the distance of a day's march, encamping from time to time and destroying all that grew on the ground. The Persians no sooner caught sight of the Scythian horse than they pursued upon their track, while the enemy retired before them. The pursuit of the Persians was directed towards the single division of the Scythian army, and thus their line of march was eastward toward the Tanais. The Scyths crossed the river, and the Persians after them, still in pursuit. In this way they passed through the country of the Sauromatai and entered that of the Budini. As long as the march of the Persian army lay through the countries of the Scythians and Sauromatai, there was nothing which they could damage, the land being waste and barren. But on entering the territories of the Budini, they came upon the wooden fortress above mentioned, which was deserted by its inhabitants and left quite empty of everything. This place they burnt to the ground, and having so done, again pressed forward on the track of the retreating Scythians, till, having passed through the entire country of the Budini, they reached the desert, which has no inhabitants, and extends a distance of 7 days' journey above the Budinian territory. Beyond this desert dwell the Thaisagatai, out of whose land 4 great streams flow. These rivers all traverse the country of the Maiocians, and fall into the Palus Maiotis. Their names are the Lycus, the Oarus, the Tanais, and the Syrgis. When Darius reached the desert, he paused from his pursuit and halted his army upon the Oarus. Here he built 8 large forts at an equal distance from each other, 60 furlongs apart, or thereabouts, the ruins of which were still remaining in my day. During the time that he was so occupied, the Scythians, whom he had been following, made a circuit by the higher regions and re-entered Scythia. On their complete disappearance, Darius, seeing nothing more of them, left his forts half finished and returned towards the west. He imagined that the Scythians whom he had seen were the entire nation, and that they had fled in that direction. He now quickened his march and entered Scythia, fell in with the 2 combined divisions of the Scythian army, and instantly gave them chase. They kept to their plan of retreating before him at the distance of a day's march, and he, still following them hotly, they led him, as had been previously settled, into the territories of the nations that had refused to become their allies, and first of all into the country of the Melpomene. Great disturbance was caused among this people by the invasion of the Scyths first, and then of the Persians. So, having harassed them after this sort, the Scythians led the way into the land of the Androphagi, with the same result as before, and thence passed onwards into Nuris, where their coming likewise spread dismay among the inhabitants. Still retreating, they approached the Agathyrsi, but this people, which had witnessed the flight and terror of their neighbours, didn't wait for the Scyths to invade them, but sent a herald to forbid them to cross their borders, and to forewarn them that if they made the attempt it would be resisted by force of arms. The Agathyrsi then proceeded to the frontier to defend their country against the invaders. As for the other nations, the Melpomene, the Androphagi, and the Nuri, instead of defending themselves when the Scyths and Persians overran their lands, they forgot their threats and fled away in confusion to the deserts lying towards the north. The Scythians, when the Agathyrsi forbade them to enter their country, refrained, and led the Persians back from the Nurian district into their own land. This had gone on so long, and seemed so interminable, that Darius at last sent a horseman to Idanthyrsis, the Scythian king, with the following message: "Thou strange man, why dost thou keep on flying before me, when there are two things thou mightest do so easily? If thou deemest thyself able to resist my arms, cease thy wanderings, and come, let us engage in battle. Or if thou art conscious that my strength is greater than thine, even so thou shouldst cease to run away. Thou hast but to bring thy lord earth and water, and to come at once to a conference." To this message Idanthyrsis, the Scythian king, replied, "This is my way, Persian. I never fear men nor fly from them. I haven't done so in times past, nor do I now fly from thee. There is nothing new or strange in what I do. I only follow my common mode of life in peaceful years. Now I will tell thee why I do not at once join battle with thee. We Scythians have neither towns nor cultivated lands, which might induce us, through fear of their being taken or ravaged, to be in any hurry to fight with you. If, however, you must needs come to blows with us speedily, look you now, there are our fathers' tombs. Seek them out, and attempt to meddle with them, then ye shall see whether or no we will fight with you. Till ye do this, be sure we shall not join battle unless it pleases us. This is my answer to the challenge to fight. As for lords, I acknowledge only Jove, my ancestor, and Hestia, the Scythian queen. Earth and water, the tribute thou askest, I do not send, but thou shalt soon receive more suitable gifts. Last of all, in return for thy calling thyself my lord, I say to thee, go weep." This is what men mean by the Scythian mode of speech. So the herald departed, bearing this message to Darius. When the Scythian kings heard the name of slavery, they were filled with rage, and dispatched the division under Scopacis, to which the Sauromatai were joined, with orders that they should seek a conference with the Ionians who had been left at the Ister to guard the bridge. Meanwhile the Scythians, who remained behind, resolved no longer to lead the Persians hither and thither about their country, but to fall upon them whenever they should be at their meals. So they waited till such times, and then did as they had determined. In these combats the Scythian horse always put to flight the horse of the enemy. These last, however, when routed, fell back upon their foot, who never failed to afford them support, while the Scythians, on their side, as soon as they had driven the horse in, retired again, for fear of the foot. And by night, too, the Scythians made many similar attacks. There was one very strange thing which greatly advantaged the Persians, and was of equal disservice to the Scyths in these assaults on the Persian camp. This was the braying of the asses and the appearance of the mules, for, as I observed before, the land of the Scythians produces neither ass nor mule, and contains no single specimen of either animal by reason of the cold. So when the asses brayed, they frightened the Scythian cavalry, and often in the middle of a charge the horses, hearing the noise made by the asses, would take fright and wheel round, pricking up their ears and showing astonishment. This was owing to their having never heard the noise or seen the form of the animal before, and it wasn't without some little influence on the progress of the war. The Scythians, when they perceived signs that the Persians were becoming alarmed, took steps to induce them not to quit Scythia, in the hope, if they stayed, of inflicting on them the greater injury when their supplies should altogether fail. To effect this, they would leave some of their cattle exposed with the herdsmen, while they themselves moved away to a distance. The Persians would make a foray and take the beasts, whereupon they would be highly elated. This they did several times, until at last Darius was at his wits' end. Hereon the Scythian princes, understanding how matters stood, dispatched a herald to the Persian camp with presents for the king. These were a bird, a mouse, a frog, and 5 arrows. The Persians asked the bearer to tell them what these gifts might mean, but he made answer that he had no orders except to deliver them, and return again with all speed. If the Persians were wise, he added, they would find out the meaning for themselves. So when they heard this, they held a council to consider the matter. Darius gave it as his opinion that the Scyths intended a surrender of themselves and their country, both land and water, into his hands. This he conceived to be the meaning of the gifts, because the mouse is an inhabitant of the earth, and eats the same food as man, while the frog passes his life in the water, the bird bears a great resemblance to the horse, and the arrows might signify the surrender of all their power. To the explanation of Darius, Gobryas, one of the 7 conspirators against the Magus, opposed another, which was as follows: Unless, Persians, ye can turn into birds and fly up into the sky, or become mice and burrow under the ground, or make yourselves frogs and take refuge in the fens, ye will never make escape from this land, but die, pierced by our arrows. Such were the meanings which the Persians assigned to the gifts. The single division of the Scyths, which in the early part of the war had been appointed to keep guard about the Palace Myotis, and had now been sent to get speech of the Ionians stationed at the Ister, addressed them on reaching the bridge in these words: Men of Ionia, we bring you freedom, if ye will only do as we recommend. Darius, we understand, enjoined you to keep your guard here at this bridge just 60 days. Then, if he didn't appear, you were to return home. Now, therefore, act so as to be free from blame, alike in his sight and in ours. Tarry here the appointed time, and at the end go your ways. Having said this, and received a promise from the Ionians to do as they desired, the Scythians hastened back with all possible speed. After the sending of the gifts to Darius, the part of the Scythian army which hadn't marched to the Ister drew out in battle array, horse and foot, against the Persians, and seemed about to come to an engagement. But as they stood in battle array, it chanced that a hare started up between them and the Persians and set to running, when immediately all the Scyths who saw it rushed off in pursuit, with great confusion and loud cries and shouts. Darius, hearing the noise, inquired the cause of it, and was told that the Scythians were all engaged in hunting a hare. On this he turned to those with whom he was wont to converse, and said, These men do indeed despise us utterly, and now I see that Gobryas was right about the Scythian gifts. As therefore his opinion is now mine likewise, it's time we form some wise plan, whereby we may secure ourselves a safe return to our homes. Ah, sire, Gobryas rejoined, I was well nigh sure ere I came here that this was an impracticable race. Since our coming, I am yet more convinced of it, especially now that I see them making game of us. My advice is, therefore, that when night falls we light our fires, as we are wont to do at other times, and leaving behind us on some pretext that portion of our army which is weak and unequal to hardship, taking care also to leave our asses tethered, retreat from Scythia before our foes march forward to the Ister and destroy the bridge, or the Ionians come to any resolution which may lead to our ruin. So Gobryas advised. And when night came, Darius followed his counsel, and leaving his 6 soldiers and those whose loss would be of least account, with the asses also tethered about the camp, marched away. The asses were left that their noise might be heard. The men, really, because they were sick and useless, but under the pretence that he was about to fall upon the Scythians with the flower of his troops, and that they meanwhile were to guard his camp for him. Having thus declared his plans to the men whom he was deserting, and having caused the fires to be lighted, Darius set forth and marched hastily towards the Ister. The asses, aware of the departure of the host, brayed louder than ever, and the Scythians, hearing the sound, entertained no doubt of the Persians being still in the same place. When day dawned, the men who had been left behind, perceiving that they were betrayed by Darius, stretched out their hands towards the Scythians, and spoke as befitted their situation. The enemy no sooner heard than they quickly joined all their troops in one, and both portions of the Scythian army, alike that which consisted of a single division and that made up of 2, accompanied by all their allies, the Sauromatai, the Budini, and the Geloni, set off in pursuit and made straight for the Ister. As, however, the Persian army was chiefly foot, and had no knowledge of the routes, which are not cut out in Scythia, while the Scyths were all horsemen and well acquainted with the shortest way, it so happened that the 2 armies missed one another, and the Scythians, getting far ahead of their adversaries, came first to the bridge. Finding that the Persians were not yet arrived, they addressed the Ionians who were aboard their ships in these words: Men of Ionia, the number of your days is out, and ye do wrong to remain. Fear doubtless has kept you here hitherto. Now, however, you may safely break the bridge and hasten back to your homes, rejoicing that you are free, and thanking for it the gods and the Scythians. Your former lord and master we undertake so to handle that he will never again make war upon anyone. The Ionians now held a council. Miltiades, the Athenian, who was king of the Chersonesids upon the Hellespont and their commander of the Ister, recommended the other generals to do as the Scythians wished and restore freedom to Ionia. But Histiaeus, the Milesian, opposed this advice. It's through Darius, he said, that we enjoy our thrones in our several states. If his power be overturned, I cannot continue lord of Miletus, nor ye of your cities, for there's not one of them which will not prefer democracy to kingly rule. Then the other captains, who till Histiaeus spoke were about to vote with Miltiades, changed their minds and declared in favour of the last speaker. The following were the votes on this occasion, all of them men who stood high in the esteem of the Persian king: the tyrants of the Hellespont, Daphnis of Abydos, Hippoclus of Lampsacus, Hierophantus of Parium, Metrodorus of Proconnesus, Aristagoras of Cyzicus, and Ariston of Byzantium, the Ionian princes, Stratus of Chios, Iacches of Samos, Laodamus of Phocea, and Histiaeus of Miletus, the man who had opposed Miltiades. Only one Aeolian of note was present, to wit, Aristagoras of Cyme. Having resolved to follow the advice of Histiaeus, the Greek leaders further determined to speak and act as follows. In order to appear to the Scythians to be doing something, when in fact they were doing nothing of consequence, and likewise to prevent them from forcing a passage across the Ister by the bridge, they resolved to break up the part of the bridge which had butted on Scythia to the distance of a bow-shot from the river bank, and to assure the Scythians, while the demolition was proceeding, that there was nothing which they wouldn't do to pleasure them. Such were the additions made to the resolution of Histiaeus. And then Histiaeus himself stood forth and made answer to the Scyths in the name of all the Greeks. Good is the advice which ye have brought us, Scythians, and well have ye done to come here with such speed. Your efforts have now put us into the right path, and our efforts shall not be wanting to advance your cause. Your own eyes see that we are engaged in breaking the bridge, and believe us, we will work zealously to procure our own freedom. Meantime, while we labour here at our task, be it your business to seek them out, and when found, for our sakes as well as your own, to visit them with the vengeance which they so well deserve. Again the Scyths put faith in the promises of the Ionian chiefs, and retraced their steps, hoping to fall in with the Persians. They missed, however, the enemy's whole line of march, their own former acts being to blame for it. Had they not ravaged all the pasturages of that region and filled in all the wells, they would have easily found the Persians whenever they chose. But as it turned out, the measures which seemed to them so wisely planned were exactly what caused their failure. They took a route where water was to be found and fodder could be got for their horses, and on this track sought their adversaries, expecting that they too would retreat through regions where these things were to be obtained. The Persians, however, kept strictly to the line of their former march, never for a moment departing from it, and even so gained the bridge with difficulty. It was night when they arrived, and their terror when they found the bridge broken up was great, for they thought that perhaps the Ionians had deserted them. Now there was in the army of Darius a certain man, an Egyptian, who had a louder voice than any other man in the world. This person was bid by Darius to stand at the water's edge and call Histiaeus the Milesian. The fellow did as he was bid, and Histiaeus, hearing him at the very first summons, brought the fleet to assist in conveying the army across, and once more made good the bridge. By these means the Persians escaped from Scythia, while the Scyths sought for them in vain, again missing their track. And hence the Scythians are accustomed to say of the Ionians, by way of reproach, that if they be looked upon as free men, they are the basest and most dastardly of all mankind, but if they be considered as under servitude, they are the faithfulest of slaves, and the most fondly attached to their lords. Such were the Scythian taunts against the Ionians. Darius, having passed through Thrace, reached Sestos in the Chersonese, whence he crossed by the help of his fleet into Asia, leaving a Persian named Megabazus commander on the European side. This was the man on whom Darius once conferred special honour by a compliment which he paid him before all the Persians. He was about to eat some pomegranates, and had opened the first, when his brother, Artabanus, asked him what he would like to have in as great plenty as the seeds of the pomegranate. Darius answered, "Had I as many men like Megabazus as there are seeds here, it would please me better than to be lord of Greece." Such was the compliment wherewith Darius honoured the general to whom at this time he gave the command of the troops left in Europe, amounting in all to some 80,000 men. This same Megabazus got himself an undying remembrance among the Hellespontians by a certain speech which he made. It came to his knowledge, while he was staying at Byzantium, that the Chalcedonians made their settlement 17 years earlier than the Byzantines. Then, said he, the Chalcedonians must at that time have been labouring under blindness, otherwise, when so far more excellent a sight was open to them, they would never have chosen one so greatly inferior. Megabazus now, having been appointed to take the command upon the Hellespont, employed himself in the reduction of all those states which had not of their own accord joined the Medes. About this very time, another great expedition was undertaken against Libya, on a pretext which I'll relate when I've premised certain particulars. The descendants of the Argonauts in the third generation, driven out of Lemnos by the Pelasgi, who carried off the Athenian women from Broron, took ship and went to Lacedaemon, where, seating themselves on Mount Taygetum, they proceeded to kindle their fires. The Lacedaemonians, seeing this, sent a herald to inquire of them who they were, and from what region they had come, whereupon they made answer that they were Minii, sons of the heroes by whom the ship Argo was manned, for these persons had stayed a while in Lemnos, and had there become their progenitors. On hearing this account of their descent, the Lacedaemonians sent to them a second time, and asked what was their object in coming to Lacedaemon, and there kindling their fires. They answered that, driven from their own land by the Pelasgi, they had come, as was most reasonable, to their fathers, and their wish was to dwell with them in their country, partake their privileges, and obtain allotments of land. It seemed good to the Lacedaemonians to receive the Minii among them on their own terms, to assign them lands, and enroll them in their tribes. What chiefly moved them to this was the consideration that the sons of Tyndarus had sailed on board the Argo. The Minii, on their part, forthwith married Spartan wives, and gave the wives whom they had married in Lemnos to Spartan husbands. However, before much time had elapsed, the Minii began to wax wanton, demanded to share the throne, and committed other impieties, whereupon the Lacedaemonians passed on them sentence of death, and seizing them, cast them into prison. Now the Lacedaemonians never put criminals to death in the daytime, but always at night. When the Minii accordingly were about to suffer, their wives, who were not only citizens but daughters of the chief men among the Spartans, entreated to be allowed to enter the prison and have some talk with their lords. And the Spartans, not expecting any fraud from such a quarter, granted their request. The women entered the prison, gave their own clothes to their husbands, and received theirs in exchange, after which the Minii, dressed in their wives' garments, and thus passing for women, went forth. Having effected their escape in this manner, they seated themselves once more upon Taygetum. It happened that at this very time Theras, son of Ortesian, whose father Tisamenus was the son of Thersander and grandson of Polynices, was about to lead out a colony from Lacedaemon. This Theras, by birth a Cadmeian, was uncle on the mother's side to the two sons of Aristodemus, Procles and Eurysthenes, and during their infancy administered in their right the royal power. When his nephews, however, on attaining to man's estate, took the government, Theras, who couldn't bear to be under the authority of others after he had wielded authority so long himself, resolved to leave Sparta and cross the sea to join his kindred. There were in the island now called Thera, but at that time Callisti, certain descendants of Membliarus, the son of Poikiles, a Phoenician. For Cadmus, the son of Agenor, when he was sailing in search of Euterpe, made a landing on this island, and either because the country pleased him, or because he had a purpose in so doing, left there a number of Phoenicians, and with them his own kinsman Membliarus. Callisti had been inhabited by this race for 8 generations of men before the arrival of Theras from Lacedaemon. Theras now, having with him a certain number of men from each of the tribes, was setting forth on his expedition hitherward. Far from intending to drive out the former inhabitants, he regarded them as his near kin, and meant to settle among them. It happened that just at this time the Minii, having escaped from their prison, had taken up their station upon Mount Taygetum, and the Lacedaemonians, wishing to destroy them, were considering what was best to be done, when Theras begged their lives, undertaking to remove them from the territory. His prayer being granted, he took ship and sailed with 3 Triacontas to join the descendants of Membliarus. He wasn't, however, accompanied by all the Minii, but only by some few of them. The greater number fled to the land of the Phoriats, and Corcans, whom they drove out, themselves occupying the region in 6 bodies, by which were afterwards built the towns of Leprium, Macistus, Phryxae, Pyrgus, Epium, and Nudium, whereof the greater part were in my day demolished by the Eleans. The island was called Thera after the name of its founder. This same Theras had a son who refused to cross the sea with him. Theras therefore left him behind, a sheep, as he said, among wolves. From this speech his son came to be called Aeolicus, a name which afterwards grew to be the only one by which he was known. This Aeolicus was the father of Aegeus, from whom sprang the Aegidae, a great tribe in Sparta. The men of this tribe lost at one time all their children, whereupon they were bidden by an oracle to build a temple to the Furies of Laius and Oedipus. They complied, and the mortality ceased. The same thing happened in Thera to the descendants of these men. Thus far the history is delivered without variation both by the Therians and the Lacedaemonians, but from this point we have only the Therian narrative. Grinus, they say, the son of Aesanius, a descendant of Theras, and king of the island of Thera, went to Delphi to offer a hecatomb on behalf of his native city. He was accompanied by a large number of the citizens, and among the rest by Battus, the son of Polymnestus, who belonged to the Minean family of the Euphemidae. On Grinus consulting the oracle about sundry matters, the Pythoness gave him for answer that he should found a city in Libya. Grinus replied to this, I, O king, am too far advanced in years, and too inactive for such a work. Bid one of these youngsters undertake it. As he spoke, he pointed towards Battus, and thus the matter rested for that time. When the embassy returned to Thera, small account was taken of the oracle by the Therians, as they were quite ignorant where Libya was, and weren't so venturesome as to send out a colony in the dark. 7 years passed from the utterance of the oracle, and not a drop of rain fell in Thera. All the trees in the island, except one, were killed with the drought. The Therians upon this sent to Delphi, and were reminded reproachfully that they had never colonized Libya. So, as there was no help for it, they sent messengers to Crete to inquire whether any of the Cretans, or of the strangers sojourning among them, had ever travelled as far as Libya. And these messengers of theirs, in their wanderings about the island, among other places, visited Itanus, where they fell in with a man whose name was Corobius, a dealer in purple. In answer to their inquiries, he told them that contrary winds had once carried him to Libya, where he had gone ashore on a certain island which was named Plataea. So they hired this man's services and took him back with them to Thera. A few persons then sailed from Thera to reconnoitre. Guided by Corobius to the island of Plataea, they left him there with provisions for a certain number of months, and returned home with all speed to give their countrymen account of the island. During their absence, which was prolonged beyond the time that had been agreed upon, Corobius's provisions failed him. He was relieved, however, after a while, by a Samian vessel under the command of a man named Callias, which, on its way to Egypt, was forced to put in at Plataea. The crew, informed by Corobius of all the circumstances, left him sufficient food for a year. They themselves quitted the island, and, anxious to reach Egypt, made sail in that direction, but were carried out of their course by a gale of wind from the east. The storm not abating, they were driven past the Pillars of Hercules, and at last, by some special guiding providence, reached Tartessus. This trading town was in those days a virgin port, unfrequented by the merchants. The Samians, in consequence, made by the return voyage a profit greater than any Greeks before their day, excepting Sostratus, son of Laodamas, an Aeginetan, with whom no one else can compare. From the 10th part of their gains, amounting to 6 talents, the Samians made a brazen vessel in shape like an Argive wine bowl, adorned with the heads of griffins standing out in high relief. This bowl, supported by 3 kneeling colossal figures in bronze of the height of 7 cubits, was placed as an offering in the temple of Hera at Samos. The aid given to Corobius was the original cause of that close friendship which afterwards united the Cyrenaeans and Therians with the Samians. The Therians, who had left Corobius at Plataea, when they reached Thera, told their countrymen that they had colonized an island on the coast of Libya. They of Thera, upon this, resolved that men should be sent to join the colony from each of their 7 districts, and that the brothers in every family should draw lots to determine who were to go. Battus was chosen to be king and leader of the colony. So these men departed for Plataea on board of 2 Penteconters. Such is the account which the Therians give. In the sequel of the history, their accounts tally with those of the people of Cyrene, but in what they relate of Battus, these two nations differ most widely. The following is the Cyrenaic story. There was once a king named Etearchus, who ruled over Axus, a city in Crete, and had a daughter named Phronima. This girl's mother having died, Etearchus married a second wife, who no sooner took up her abode in his house than she proved a true stepmother to poor Phronima, always vexing her and contriving against her every sort of mischief. At last she taxed her with light conduct, and Etearchus, persuaded by his wife that the charge was true, bethought himself of a most barbarous mode of punishment. There was a certain Therian named Themison, a merchant living at Axus. This man Etearchus invited to be his friend and guest, and then induced him to swear that he would do him any service he might require. No sooner had he given the promise than the king fetched Phronima, and delivering her into his hands, told him to carry her away and throw her into the sea. Hereupon Themison, full of indignation at the fraud whereby his oath had been procured, dissolved forthwith the friendship, and taking the girl with him, sailed away from Crete. Having reached the open main, to acquit himself of the obligation on which he was laid by his oath to Etearchus, he fastened ropes about the damsel, and letting her down into the sea, drew her up again, and so made sail for Thera. At Thera, Polymnestus, one of the chief citizens of the place, took Phronima to be his concubine. The fruit of this union was a son, who stammered and had a lisp in his speech. According to the Cyreneans and Therians, the name given to the boy was Battus. In my opinion, however, he was called at the first something else, and only got the name of Battus after his arrival in Libya, assuming it either in consequence of the words addressed to him by the Delphian oracle, or on account of the office which he held. For in the Libyan tongue the word Battus means a king. And this, I think, was the reason why the Pythoness addressed him as she did. She knew he was to be a king in Libya, and so she used the Libyan word in speaking to him. For after he had grown to man's estate, he made a journey to Delphi to consult the oracle about his voice. When, upon his putting his question, the Pythoness thus replied to him: Battus, thou camest to ask of thy voice, but Phoebus Apollo bids thee establish a city in Libya, abounding in fleeces. Which was as if he had said in her own tongue, King, thou camest to ask of thy voice. When he replied, Mighty Lord, I did indeed come hither to consult thee about my voice, but thou speakest to me of quite other matters, bidding me colonize Libya, an impossible thing. What power have I? What followers? Thus he spake, but he didn't persuade the Pythoness to give him any other response, so when he found that she persisted in her former answer, he left her speaking, and set out on his return to Thera. After a while everything began to go wrong with Battus and the rest of the Therians, whereupon these last, ignorant of the cause of their sufferings, sent to Delphi to inquire for what reason they were afflicted. The Pythoness in reply told them that if they and Battus would make a settlement at Cyrene in Libya, things would go better with them. Upon this the Therians sent out Battus with 2 Penteconters, and with these he proceeded to Libya. But within a little time, not knowing what else to do, the men returned, and arrived off Thera. The Therians, when they saw the vessels approaching, received them with showers of missiles, wouldn't allow them to come near the shore, and ordered the men to sail back from whence they came. Thus compelled to return, they settled on an island near the Libyan coast, which, as I've already said, was called Plataea. In size, it's reported to have been about equal to the city of Cyrene, as it now stands. In this place they continued 2 years, but at the end of that time, as their ill luck still followed them, they left the island to the care of one of their number, and went in a body to Delphi, where they made complaint at the shrine to the effect that notwithstanding they had colonized Libya, they prospered as poorly as before. Hereon the Pythoness made them the following answer. Knowest thou better than I, fair Libya, abounding in fleeces, better the stranger than he who has trod it? O clever Therians! Battus and his friends, when they heard this, sailed back to Plataea. It was plain the god wouldn't hold them acquitted of the colony till they were absolutely in Libya. So, taking with them the man whom they had left upon the island, they made a settlement on the mainland directly opposite Plataea, fixing themselves at a place called Aziris, which is closed in on both sides by the most beautiful hills, and on one side is washed by a river. Here they remained 6 years, at the end of which time the Libyans induced them to move, promising that they would lead them to a better situation. So the Greeks left Aziris, and were conducted by the Libyans towards the west, their journey being so arranged by the calculation of their guides that they passed in the night the most beautiful district of that whole country, which is the region called Erato. The Libyans brought them to a spring, which goes by the name of Apollo's fountain, and told them, Here, Grecians, is the proper place for you to settle, for here the sky leaks. During the lifetime of Battus, the founder of the colony, who reigned 40 years, and during that of his son, Arcesilaus, who reigned 16, the Cyrenians continued at the same level, neither more nor fewer in number than they were at the first. But in the reign of the third king, Battus, surnamed the Happy, the advice of the Pythoness brought Greeks from every quarter into Libya to join the settlement. The Cyrenians had offered to all comers a share in their lands, and the oracle had spoken as follows, He that is backward to share in the pleasant Libyan acres, sooner or later, I warn him, will feel regret at his folly. Thus a great multitude were collected together to Cyrene, and the Libyans of the neighbourhood found themselves stripped of large portions of their lands. So they and their king Adikran, being robbed and insulted by the Cyrenians, sent messengers to Egypt, and put themselves under the rule of Apries, the Egyptian monarch, who upon this levied a vast army of Egyptians and sent them against Cyrene. The inhabitants of that place left their walls and marched out in force to the district of Erato, where, near the spring called Thesti, they engaged the Egyptian host, and defeated it. The Egyptians, who had never before made trial of the prowess of the Greeks, and so thought but meanly of them, were routed with such slaughter that but a very few of them ever got back home. For this reason the subjects of Apries, who laid the blame of the defeat on him, revolted from his authority. This Battus left a son called Arcesilaus, who, when he came to the throne, had dissensions with his brothers, which ended in their quitting him and departing to another region of Libya, where, after consulting among themselves, they founded the city which is still called, by the name then given to it, Barca. At the same time they endeavoured to induce the Libyans to revolt from Cyrene. Not long afterwards Arcesilaus made an expedition against the Libyans, who had received his brothers and been prevailed upon to revolt, and they, fearing his power, fled to their countrymen who dwelt towards the east. Arcesilaus pursued and chased them to a place called Leucon, which is in Libya, where the Libyans resolved to risk a battle. Accordingly they engaged the Cyrenians and defeated them so entirely that as many as 7,000 of their heavy armed were slain in the fight. Arcesilaus, after this blow, fell sick, and whilst he was under the influence of a draught which he had taken, was strangled by Learchus, one of his brothers. This Learchus was afterwards entrapped by Eryxo, the widow of Arcesilaus, and put to death. Battus, Arcesilaus' son, succeeded to the kingdom, a lame man who limped in his walk. Their late calamities now induced the Cyrenians to send to Delphi and inquire of the god what form of government they had best set up to secure themselves prosperity. The Pythoness answered by recommending them to fetch an arbitrator from Mantinea in Arcadia. Accordingly they sent, and the Mantineans gave them a man named Demonax, a person of high repute among the citizens, who on his arrival at Cyrene, having first made himself acquainted with all the circumstances, proceeded to enroll the people in 3 tribes. One he made to consist of the Therians and their vassals, another of the Peloponnesians and Cretans, and a third of the various islanders. Besides this, he deprived the king Battus of his former privileges, only reserving for him certain sacred lands and offices, while with respect to the powers which had hitherto been exercised by the king, he gave them all into the hands of the people. Thus matters rested during the lifetime of this Battus, but when his son Arcesilaus came to the throne, great disturbance arose about the privileges. For Arcesilaus, son of Battus the Lame, and Pheretima, refused to submit to the arrangements of Demonax the Mantinean, and claimed all the powers of his forefathers. In the contention which followed, Arcesilaus was worsted, whereupon he fled to Samos, while his mother took refuge at Salamis in the island of Cyprus. Salamis was at that time ruled by Avelthon, the same who offered at Delphi the censer which is in the treasury of the Corinthians, a work deserving of admiration. Of him Pheretima made request that he would give her an army, whereby she and her son might regain Cyrene. But Avelthon, preferring to give her anything rather than an army, made her various presents. Pheretima accepted them all, saying as she took them, "Good is this too, O king, but better were it to give me the army which I crave at thy hands." Finding that she repeated these words each time that he presented her with a gift, Avelthon at last sent her a golden spindle and distaff with the wool ready for spinning. Again she uttered the same speech as before, whereupon Avelthon rejoined, "These are the gifts I present to women, not armies." At Samos, meanwhile, Arcesilaus was collecting troops by the promise of granting them lands. Having in this way drawn together a vast host, he sent to Delphi to consult the oracle about his restoration. The answer of the Pythoness was this: "Loxias grants thy race to rule over Cyrene till 4 kings Battus, 4 Arcesilaus by name, have passed away. Beyond this term of 8 generations of men, he warns you not to seek to extend your reign. Thou, for thy part, be gentle when thou art restored. If thou findest the oven full of jars, bake not the jars, but be sure to speed them on their way. If, however, thou heatest the oven, then avoid the island, else thou wilt die thyself, and with thee the most beautiful bull." So spake the Pythoness. Arcesilaus upon this returned to Cyrene, taking with him the troops which he had raised in Samos. There he obtained possession of the supreme power, whereupon, forgetful of the oracle, he took proceedings against those who had driven him into banishment. Some of them fled from him and quitted the country for good. Others fell into his hands and were sent to suffer death in Cyprus. These last happening on their passage to put in through stress of weather at Ctidnos, the Cnidians rescued them and sent them off to Thera. Another body found a refuge in the great tower of Aglomachus, a private edifice, and were there destroyed by Arcesilaus, who heaped wood around the place and burnt them to death. Aware, after the deed was done, that this was what the Pythoness meant when she warned him, if he found the jars in the oven, not to bake them, he withdrew himself of his own accord from the city of Cyrene, believing that to be the island of the oracle, and fearing to die as had been prophesied. Being married to a relation of his own, a daughter of Alazia, at that time king of the Barcians, he took up his abode with him. At Barca, however, certain of the citizens, together with a number of Cyrenean exiles, recognizing him as he walked in the forum, killed him. They slew also at the same time Alazir, his father-in-law. So Arkesilaus, wittingly or unwittingly, disobeyed the oracle and thereby fulfilled his destiny. Pheretima, the mother of Arkesilaus, during the time that her son, after working his own ruin, dwelt at Barca, continued to enjoy all his privileges at Cyrene, managing the government and taking her seat at the council board. No sooner, however, did she hear of the death of her son at Barca than, leaving Cyrene, she fled in haste to Egypt. Arkesilaus had claims for service done to Cambyses, son of Cyrus, since it was by him that Cyrene was put under the Persian yoke, and a rate of tribute agreed upon. Pheretima therefore went straight to Egypt, and presenting herself as a suppliant before Ariandes, entreated him to avenge her wrongs. Her son, she said, had met his death on account of his being so well affected towards the Medes. Now Ariandes had been made governor of Egypt by Cambyses. He it was who in after times was punished with death by Darius for seeking to rival him. Aware by report and also by his own eyesight that Darius wished to leave a memorial of himself such as no king had ever left before, Ariandes resolved to follow his example, and did so till he got his reward. Darius had refined gold to the last perfection of purity in order to have coins struck of it. Ariandes in his Egyptian government did the very same with silver, so that to this day there is no such pure silver anywhere as the Ariandic. Darius, when this came to his ears, brought another charge, a charge of rebellion against Ariandes, and put him to death. At the time of which we are speaking, Ariandes, moved with compassion for Pheretima, granted her all the forces which were in Egypt, both land and sea. The command of the army he gave to Amasis, a Merathian, while Badres, one of the tribe of the Pasargadae, was appointed to lead the fleet. Before the expedition, however, left Egypt, he sent a herald to Barca to inquire who it was that had slain King Arkesilaus. The Barcaeans replied that they, one and all, acknowledged the deed. Arkesilaus had done them many and great injuries. After receiving this reply, Ariandes gave the troops orders to march with Pheretima. Such was the cause which served as a pretext for this expedition. Its real object was, I believe, the subjugation of Libya, for Libya is inhabited by many and various races, and of these but a very few were subjects of the Persian king, while by far the larger number held Darius in no manner of respect. The Libyans dwell in the order which I will now describe. Beginning on the side of Egypt, the first Libyans are the Adirmachidae. These people have, in most points, the same customs as the Egyptians, but use the costume of the Libyans. Their women wear on each leg a ring made of bronze. They let their hair grow long, and when they catch any vermin on their persons, bite it and throw it away. In this they differ from all the other Libyans. They are also the only tribe with whom the custom obtains of bringing all women about to become brides before the king, that he might deflower the one who seemed to him the most agreeable. The Adirmachidae extend from the borders of Egypt to the harbour called Port Plinus. Next to the Adirmachidae are the Gilligamai, who inhabit the country westward as far as the island of Aphrodisias. Of this tract is the island of Plataea, which the Cyreneans colonized. Here too, upon the mainland, are Port Menelaus and Asiris, where the Cyreneans once lived. The silphium begins to grow in this region, extending from the island of Plataea on one side to the mouth of the Syrtis on the other. The customs of the Gilligamai are like those of the rest of their countrymen. The Asbistae adjoin the Gilligamai upon the west. They inhabit the regions above Cyrene, but don't reach to the coast, which belongs to the Cyreneans. 4-horse chariots are in more common use among them than among any other Libyans. In most of their customs they ape the manners of the Cyreneans. Westward of the Asbistae dwell the Orskisae, who possess the country above Barca, reaching, however, to the sea at the place called Euasperides. In the middle of their territory is the little tribe of the Cabalians, which touches the coast near Taucyra, a city of the Barcaeans. Their customs are like those of the Libyans above Cyrene. The Nasamonians, a numerous people, are the western neighbours of the Orskisai. In summer they leave their flocks and herds upon the seashore and go up the country to a place called Orgila, where they gather the dates from the palms, which in those parts grow thickly and are of great size, all of them being of the fruit-bearing kind. They also chase the locusts, and when caught, dry them in the sun, after which they grind them to powder, and sprinkling this upon their milk, so drink it. Each man among them has several wives, in their intercourse with whom they resemble the Massagetai. When a man has set up a staff, he is lying with a woman. When a Nasamonian first marries a woman, the custom is that the bride of the first night lies with all the guests in turn. As each lies with her, he gives her a gift which he has brought from his house. The following are their customs in the swearing of oaths and the practice of augury. The man, as he swears, lays his hand upon the tomb of someone considered to have been preeminently just and good, and so doing swears by his name. For divination they betake themselves to the sepulchres of their own ancestors, and after praying lie down to sleep upon their graves. By the dreams which then come to them they guide their conduct. When they pledge their faith to one another, each gives the other to drink out of his hand. If there be no liquid to be had, they take up dust from the ground and put their tongues to it. On the country of the Nasamonians borders that of the Psylli, who were swept away under the following circumstances. The south wind had blown for a long time and dried up all the tanks in which their water was stored. Now the whole region within the Syrtis is utterly devoid of springs. Accordingly, the Psylli took counsel among themselves, and by common consent made war upon the south wind. So at least the Libyans say. I do but repeat their words. They went forth and reached the desert. But there the south wind rose and buried them under heaps of sand. Whereupon, the Psylli being destroyed, their lands passed to the Nasamonians. Above the Nasamonians, towards the south, in the district where the wild beasts abound, dwell the Garamantians, who avoid all society or intercourse with their fellow men, have no weapon of war, and do not know how to defend themselves. These border the Nasamonians on the south. Westward along the seashore their neighbours are the Macae, who, by letting the locks about the crown of their head grow long, while they clip them close everywhere else, make their hair resemble a crest. In war these people use the skins of ostriches for shields. The river Cynipes rises among them from the height called the Hill of the Graces, and runs from thence through their country to the sea. The Hill of the Graces is thickly covered with wood, and is thus very unlike the rest of Libya, which is bare. It's distant 200 furlongs from the sea. Adjoining the Macae are the Gindanes, whose women wear on their legs anklets of leather. Each lover that a woman has gives her one, and she who can show the most is the best esteemed, as she appears to have been loved by the greatest number of men. A promontory jutting out into the sea from the country of the Gindanes is inhabited by the Lotophagi, who live entirely on the fruit of the lotus tree. The lotus fruit is about the size of the lentisk berry, and in sweetness resembles the date. The Lotophagi even succeed in obtaining from it a sort of wine. The sea-coast beyond the Lotophagi is occupied by the Macleans, who use the lotus to some extent, though not so much as the people of whom we last spoke. The Macleans reach as far as the great river called the Triton, which empties itself into the great lake Tritonis. Here in this lake is an island called Phla, which it is said the Lacedaemonians were to have colonized, according to an oracle. The following is the story as it's commonly told. When Jason had finished building the Argo at the foot of Mount Pelion, he took on board the usual hecatomb, and moreover a brazen tripod. Thus equipped he set sail, intending to coast round the Peloponnese, and so to reach Delphi. The voyage was prosperous as far as Malea, but at that point a gale of wind from the north came on suddenly and carried him out of his course to the coast of Libya, where, before he discovered the land, he got among the shallows of Lake Tritonis. As he was turning it in his mind how he should find his way out, Triton, they say, appeared to him and offered to show him the channel and secure him a safe retreat, if he would give him the tripod. Jason, complying, was shown by Triton the passage through the shallows, after which the god took the tripod, and carrying it to his own temple, seated himself upon it, and, filled with prophetic fury, delivered to Jason and his companions a long prediction. When a descendant, he said, of one of the Argo's crew should seize and carry off the brazen tripod, then by inevitable fate would 100 Grecian cities be built around Lake Tritonis. The Libyans of that region, when they heard the words of this prophecy, took away the tripod and hid it. The next tribe, beyond the Macleans, is the tribe of the Orceans. Both these nations inhabit the borders of Lake Tritonis, being separated from one another by the river Triton. Both also wear their hair long, but the Macleans let it grow at the back of the head, while the Orceans have it long in front. The Orcean maidens keep year by year a feast in honour of Athena, whereat their custom is to draw up in 2 bodies and fight with stones and clubs. They say that these are rites which have come down to them from their fathers, and that they honour with them their native goddess, who is the same as the Athena, Minerva, of the Grecians. If any of the maidens die of the wounds they receive, the Orceans declare that such are false maidens. Before the fight is suffered to begin, they have another ceremony. One of the virgins, the loveliest of the number, is selected from the rest. A Corinthian helmet and a complete suit of Greek armour are publicly put upon her, and thus adorned she is made to mount into a chariot and led around the whole lake in a procession. What arms they used for the adornment of their damsels before the Greeks came to live in their country I can't say. I imagine they dressed them in Egyptian armour, for I maintain that both the shield and the helmet came into Greece from Egypt. The Orceans declare that Athena is the daughter of Poseidon and the Lake Tritonis. They say she quarrelled with her father and applied to Zeus, who consented to let her be his child, and so she became his adopted daughter. These people do not marry or live in families, but dwell together like the gregarious beasts. When their children are full grown, they are brought before the assembly of the men, which is held every 3rd month, and assigned to those whom they most resemble. Such are the tribes of wandering Libyans dwelling upon the sea-coast. Above them inland is the wild beast tract, and beyond that a ridge of sand reaching from Egyptian Thebes to the Pillars of Hercules. Throughout this ridge, at the distance of about 10 days' journey from one another, heaps of salt in large lumps lie upon hills. At the top of every hill there gushes forth from the middle of the salt a stream of water which is both cold and sweet. Around dwell men who are the last inhabitants of Libya on the side of the desert, living as they do more inland than the wild beast district. Of these nations the first is that of the Ammonians, who dwell at a distance of 10 days' journey from Thebes, and have a temple derived from that of the Theban Zeus. For at Thebes, likewise, as I mentioned above, the image of Zeus has a face like that of a ram. The Ammonians have another spring besides that which rises from the salt. The water of this stream is lukewarm at early dawn. At the time when the market fills, it's much cooler. By noon it has grown quite cold. At this time, therefore, they water their gardens. As the afternoon advances, the coldness goes off, till, about sunset, the water is once more lukewarm. Still the heat increases, and at midnight it boils furiously. After this time it again begins to cool, and grows less and less hot, till morning comes. This spring is called the Fountain of the Sun. Next to the Ammonians, at the distance of 10 days' journey along the ridge of sand, there's a second salt hill, like the Ammonian, and a second spring. The country round is inhabited, and the place bears the name of Orgila. Hither it is that the Nasamonians come to gather in the dates. 10 days' journey from Orgila there is again a salt hill and a spring. Palms of the fruitful kind grow here abundantly, as they do also at the other salt hills. This region is inhabited by a nation called the Garamantians, a very powerful people who cover the salt with mould and then sow their crops. From thence is the shortest road to the Lotophagy, a journey of 30 days. In the Garamantian country are found the oxen, which, as they graze, walk backwards. This they do because their horns curve outwards in front of their heads, so that it's not possible for them when grazing to move forwards, since in that case their horns would become fixed in the ground. Only herein do they differ from other oxen, and further in the thickness and hardness of their hides. The Garamantians have 4-horse chariots, in which they chase the troglodyte Ethiopians, who of all the nations whereof any account has reached our ears are by far the swiftest of foot. The troglodytes feed on serpents, lizards, and other similar reptiles. Their language is unlike that of any other people. It sounds like the screeching of bats. At the distance of 10 days' journey from the Garamantians there is again another salt hill and spring of water, around which dwell a people called the Atarantians, who alone of all known nations are destitute of names. The title of Atarantians is borne by the whole race in common, but the men have no particular names of their own. The Atarantians, when the sun rises high in the heaven, curse him and load him with reproaches, because, they say, he burns and wastes both their country and themselves. Once more, at the distance of 10 days' journey, there is a salt hill, a spring, and an inhabited tract. Near the salt is a mountain called Atlas, very taper and round, so lofty, moreover, that the top, it is said, cannot be seen, the clouds never quitting it either summer or winter. The natives call this mountain the Pillar of Heaven, and they themselves take their name from it, being called Atlantes. They are reported not to eat any living thing, and never to have any dreams. As far as the Atlantes, the names of the nations inhabiting the sandy ridge are known to me, but beyond them my knowledge fails. The ridge itself extends as far as the Pillars of Heracles, and even further than these, and throughout the whole distance at the end of every 10 days' journey there is a salt mine, with people dwelling round it, who all of them build their houses with blocks of the salt. No rain falls in these parts of Libya. If it were otherwise, the walls of these houses couldn't stand. The salt quarried is of 2 colours, white and purple. Beyond the ridge, southwards, in the direction of the interior, the country is a desert, with no springs, no beasts, no rain, no wood, and altogether destitute of moisture. Thus, from Egypt as far as Lake Tritonis, Libya is inhabited by wandering tribes, whose drink is milk, and their food the flesh of animals. Cow's flesh, however, none of these tribes ever taste, but abstain from it for the same reason as the Egyptians. Neither do they any of them breed swine. Even at Cyrene the women think it wrong to eat the flesh of the cow, honouring in this Isis, the Egyptian goddess, whom they worship both with fasts and festivals. The Barcaean women abstain not from cow's flesh only, but also from the flesh of swine. West of Lake Tritonis, the Libyans are no longer wanderers, nor do they practice the same customs as the wandering people, or treat their children in the same way. For the wandering Libyans, many of them at any rate, if not all, concerning which I can't speak with certainty, when their children come to the age of 4 years, burn the veins at the top of their heads with a flock from the fleece of a sheep. Others burn the veins about the temples. This they do to prevent them from being plagued in their afterlives by a flow of rheum from the head, and such they declare is the reason why they are so much more healthy than other men. Certainly the Libyans are the healthiest men that I know, but whether this is what makes them so or not I can't positively say. The healthiest certainly they are. If when the children are being burnt convulsions come on, there's a remedy of which they have made discovery. It is to sprinkle goat's water upon the child, who thus treated is sure to recover. In all this I only repeat what is said by the Libyans. The rites which the wandering Libyans use in sacrificing are the following. They begin with the ear of the victim, which they cut off and throw over their house. This done, they kill the animal by twisting the neck. They sacrifice to the sun and moon, but not to any other god. This worship is common to all the Libyans. The inhabitants of the parts about Lake Tritonis worship in addition Triton, Poseidon, and Athena, the last especially. The dress wherewith Athena's statues are adorned, and her aegis, were derived by the Greeks from the women of Libya. For except that the garments of the Libyan women are of leather, and their fringes made of leathern thongs instead of serpents, in all else the dress of both is exactly alike. The name, too, itself shows that the mode of dressing the palace statues came from Libya. For the Libyan women wear over their dress goatskins, stripped of the hair, fringes at their edges, and coloured with vermilion, and from these goatskins the Greeks get their word aegis, goat harness. I think for my part that the loud cries uttered in our sacred rites came also from thence, for the Libyan women are greatly given to such cries, and utter them very sweetly. Likewise the Greeks learnt from the Libyans to yoke 4 horses to a chariot. All the wandering tribes bury their dead according to the fashion of the Greeks, except the Nasamonians. They bury them sitting, and are right careful when the sick man is at the point of giving up the ghost, to make him sit, and not let him die lying down. The dwellings of these people are made of the stems of the asphodel, and of rushes wattled together. They can be carried from place to place. Such are the customs of the aforementioned tribes. Westward of the river Triton, and adjoining upon the Oceans, are other Libyans, who till the ground and live in houses. These people are named the Maxeans. They let the hair grow long on the right side of their heads, and shave it close on the left. They besmear their bodies with red paint, and they say that they are descended from the men of Troy. Their country and the remainder of Libya towards the west is far fuller of wild beasts and of wood than the country of the wandering people. For the eastern side of Libya, where the wanderers dwell, is low and sandy as far as the river Triton, but westward of that the land of the husbandman is very hilly, and abounds with forests and wild beasts. For this is the tract in which the huge serpents are found, and the lions, the elephants, the bears, the aspics, and the horned asses. Here too are the dog-faced creatures, and the creatures without heads, whom the Libyans declare to have their eyes in their breasts, and also the wild men and wild women, and many other far less fabulous beasts. Among the wanderers are none of these, but quite other animals, as antelopes, gazelles, buffaloes, and asses, not of the horned sort, but of a kind which doesn't need to drink. Also oryxes, whose horns are used for the curved size of kithons, and whose size is about that of the ox, foxes, hyenas, porcupines, wild rams, dictyes, jackals, panthers, boreas, land crocodiles about 3 cubits in length, very like lizards, ostriches, and little snakes, each with a single horn. All these animals are found here, and likewise those belonging to other countries, except the stag and the wild boar, but neither stag nor wild boar are found in any part of Libya. There are, however, 3 sorts of mice in these parts. The first are called 2-footed, the next zegaries, which is a Libyan word meaning hills, and the third urchins. Weasels also are found in the Silphium region, much like the Tartessian. So many, therefore, are the animals belonging to the land of the wandering Libyans, insofar at least as my researches have been able to reach. Next to the Maxean Libyans are the Zavetchians, whose wives drive their chariots to battle. On them border the Gizantians, in whose country a vast deal of honey is made by bees, very much more, however, by the skill of men. The people all paint themselves red and eat monkeys, whereof there is inexhaustible store in the hills. Off their coast, as the Carthaginians report, lies an island by named Chironis, the length of which is 200 furlongs, its breadth not great, and which is soon reached from the mainland. Vines and olive trees cover the whole of it, and there is in the island a lake, from which the young maidens of the country draw up gold dust by dipping into the mud birds' feathers smeared with pitch. If this be true, I know not, I but write what is said. It may be even so, however, since I myself have seen pitch drawn up out of the water from a lake in Zakynthus. At the place I speak of there are a number of lakes, but one is larger than the rest, being 70 feet every way, and 2 fathoms in depth. Here they let down a pole into the water with a bunch of myrtle tied to one end, and when they raise it again, there's pitch sticking to the myrtle, which in smell is like to bitumen, but in all else is better than the pitch of Pieria. This they pour into a trench dug by the lake's side, and when a good deal has thus been got together, they draw it off and put it up in jars. Whatever falls into the lake passes underground, and comes up in the sea, which is no less than 4 furlongs distant. So then what's said of the island off the Libyan coast is not without likelihood. The Carthaginians also relate the following. There's a country in Libya and a nation beyond the Pillars of Heracles, which they are wont to visit, where they no sooner arrive, but forthwith they unlade their wares, and having disposed of them after an orderly fashion along the beach, leave them, and returning aboard their ships, raise a great smoke. The natives, when they see the smoke, come down to the shore, and laying out to view so much gold as they think the worth of the wares, withdraw to a distance. The Carthaginians upon this come ashore and look. If they think the gold enough, they take it and go their way. But if it doesn't seem to them sufficient, they go aboard ship once more and wait patiently. Then the others approach and add to their gold till the Carthaginians are content. Neither party deals unfairly by the other, for they themselves never touch the gold till it comes up to the worth of their goods, nor do the natives ever carry off the goods till the gold is taken away. These be the Libyan tribes whereof I am able to give the names, and most of these cared little then, and indeed care little now, for the king of the Medes. One thing more also I can add concerning this region, namely that so far as our knowledge reaches, 4 nations and no more inhabit it, and 2 of these nations are indigenous, while 2 are not. The 2 indigenous are the Libyans and Ethiopians, who dwell respectively in the north and the south of Libya. The Phoenicians and the Greek are the incomers. It seems to me that Libya is not to compare for goodness of soil with either Asia or Europe, except the Knips region, which is named after the river that waters it. This piece of land is equal to any country in the world for cereal crops, and is in nothing like the rest of Libya. For the soil here is black, and springs of water abound, so that there's nothing to fear from drought, nor do heavy rains, and it rains in that part of Libya, do any harm when they soak the ground. The returns of the harvest come up to the measure which prevails in Babylonia. The soil is likewise good in the country of the Euterpe, for there the land brings forth in the best years 100-fold, but the Knips region yields 300-fold. The country of the Cyrenians, which is the highest tract within the part of Libya inhabited by the wandering tribes, has 3 seasons that deserve remark. First, the crops along the sea-coast begin to ripen and are ready for the harvest and the vintage. After they have been gathered in, the crops of the middle tract above the coast region, the hill country as they call it, need harvesting, while about the time when this middle crop is housed, the fruits ripen and are fit for cutting in the highest tract of all, so that the produce of the first tract has been all eaten and drunk by the time that the last harvest comes in, and the harvest time of the Cyrenians continues thus for 8 full months. So much concerning these matters. When the Persians sent from Egypt by Ariandes to help Pheretima reached Barca, they laid siege to the town, calling on those within to give up the men who had been guilty of the murder of Arcesilaus. The townspeople, however, as they had one and all taken part in the deed, refused to entertain the proposition. So the Persians beleaguered Barca for 9 months, in the course of which they dug several mines from their own lines to the walls, and likewise made a number of vigorous assaults. But their mines were discovered by a man who was a worker in brass, who went with a brazen shield all round the fortress and laid it on the ground inside the city. In other places the shield, when he laid it down, was quite dumb, but where the ground was undermined, there the brass of the shield rang. Here, therefore, the Barcaeans countermined, and slew the Persian diggers. Such was the way in which the mines were discovered. As for the assaults, the Barcaeans beat them back. When much time had been consumed, and great numbers had fallen on both sides, nor had the Persians lost fewer than their adversaries, Amasis, the leader of the land army, perceiving that although the Barcaeans would never be conquered by force, they might be overcome by fraud, contrived as follows. One night he dug a wide trench, and laid light planks of wood across the opening, after which he brought mould and placed it upon the planks, taking care to make the place level with the surrounding ground. At dawn of day he summoned the Barcaeans to a parley, and they, gladly hearkening, the terms were at length agreed upon. Oaths were interchanged upon the ground over the hidden trench, and the agreement ran thus: so long as the ground beneath our feet stands firm, the oath shall abide unchanged. The people of Barca agree to pay a fair sum to the king, and the Persians promise to cause no further trouble to the people of Barca. After the oath, the Barcaeans, relying upon its terms, threw open all their gates, went out themselves beyond the walls, and allowed as many of the enemy as chose to enter. Then the Persians broke down their secret bridge and rushed at speed into the town, their reason for breaking the bridge being that so they might observe what they had sworn, for they had promised the Barcaeans that the oath should continue so long as the ground whereon they stood was firm. When therefore the bridge was once broken down, the oath ceased to hold. Such of the Barcaeans who were most guilty the Persians gave up to Pheretima, who nailed them to crosses all round the walls of the city. She also cut off the breasts of their wives, and fastened them likewise about the walls. The remainder of the people she gave as booty to the Persians, except only the Batiadae, and those who had taken no part in the murder, to whom she handed over the possession of the town. The Persians now set out on their return home, carrying with them the rest of the Barcaeans whom they had made their slaves. On their way they came to Cyrene, and the Cyreneans, out of regard for an oracle, let them pass through the town. During the passage, Bares, the commander of the fleet, advised to seize the place, but Amasis, the leader of the land force, would not consent, because, he said, they had only been charged to attack the one Greek city of Barca. When, however, they had passed through the town and were encamped upon the hill of Lycian Jove, it repented them that they hadn't seized Cyrene, and they endeavoured to enter it a second time. The Cyreneans, however, wouldn't suffer this, whereupon, though no one appeared to offer them battle, yet a panic came upon the Persians, and they ran a distance of full 60 furlongs before they pitched their camp. Here, as they lay, a messenger came to them from Ariandes, ordering them home. Then the Persians besought the men of Cyrene to give them provisions for the way, and these consenting, they set off on their return to Egypt. But the Libyans now beset them, and for the sake of their clothes and harness, slew all who dropped behind and straggled during the whole march homewards. The furthest point of Libya reached by this Persian host was the city of Euterpe. The Barcaeans, carried into slavery, were sent from Egypt to the king, and Darius assigned them a village in Bactria for their dwelling place. To this village they gave the name of Barca, and it was to my time an inhabited place in Bactria. Nor did Pheretima herself end her days happily, for on her return to Egypt from Libya, directly after taking vengeance on the people of Barca, she was overtaken by a most horrid death. Her body swarmed with worms, which ate her flesh while she was still alive. Thus do men, by over-harsh punishments, draw down upon themselves the anger of the gods. Such then and so fierce was the vengeance which Pheretima, daughter of Battus, took upon the Barcaeans.
This book is continued on Disc 2.